2, 1.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GraniteGrok.com. We are your feared extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GraniteGrok.com.
Grok Talk.
All right, we are Grok Talk, brought to you by the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers and the bloggers at GraniteGrok.com, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Google Play, as well as at GraniteGrok.com, and anywhere else anybody decides to share it. I don't keep track. So, J.R. Hull's going to join us in, I don't remember, just 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to talk about whatever else we talk about until then. Where were we going? I forgot. I interrupted you, Mr. Orange-eating guy who can't talk because he has food in his mouth.
So, where we were going was the insolvency of Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. What was going to happen if they ran out of money? And Greg was saying that Medicare is technically insolvent or will be in a couple of years. But I said that's not even the point. Let's assume that they can somehow print money and keep that going. They have mandated, as part of Obamacare, that payments to doctors under Medicare start going down the same slope that the doc fix every year tried to undo for Medicaid. So let's wind back a little bit. A few legislative sessions ago, Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decided that the way to control spending on Medicaid, the health care for the poor, was to pay less to the doctors, a little bit less every year until basically they couldn't afford to provide service. And then every year the doctors would squeal, and every year Congress would pass the doc fix, which would restore the payments to where it was before, and they'd print a little extra money to cover the gap. Well, as part of passing Obamacare, they had to find some money to keep that total bill under $1 trillion in 10 years. Well, it's way more than that anyway. And part of that was robbing tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, I think it was tens of billions of dollars a year, hundreds of billions of dollars in total, from Medicare. And the way they were robbing that money was to put Medicare payments to doctors, that's health care for seasoned citizens like me when I stop working, on the same downward slope that Medicaid was on. So it's following it a little further behind, but ultimately that will also get to the point where doctors can't afford to serve Medicare patients. So, they're saying that anything that can't go on won't. This can't go on. At some point, it won't. Greg?
Well, I think that we need to start figuring out. The biggest problem we have is the fact that the costs of healthcare are going up at such an enormous rate. The problem is first and foremost, there's very little accountability between how much you pay on a monthly basis and your utilization of services. Given the fact that you're basically looking at as a prepaid healthcare system, your attitude is, I want the best care when I want it, and get it to me now. People don't have a connection to the actual costs that go on. Now, some folks, I have an HSA, so I'm very price sensitive when it comes to shopping. HSAs have been shown to reduce costs for just that very reason. Yes, you're protected in the case of an adverse accident, but for your routine health care, you are very price sensitive for just how much things cost. We need to get back to that. There was actually and the market is trying to adapt and adjust. But
that is how
people
healthcare...
are trying to put roadblocks. I'm going to give you an example. There is a facility in Oklahoma, a great example, and these types of facilities are expanding in the Midwest and in the South and the Southwest. It's called the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. They only take cash business. They don't take Medicaid. They don't take Medicare. They don't take private insurance. They only take cash. They're offering services at often 40 to 50% less than hospitals, as long as you pay cash. And they'll say, we have a boutique business. We have docs. There was a number of doctors formed this organization. And in New Hampshire, when we got rid of the Certificate of Need Board, there's a provision in a law, Senate Bill 481, and I know Granite Grok was all over this. You guys raised this issue. There's a provision that says that if you want to open a facility in New Hampshire, it has to take all payers, Medicare and Medicaid. So we've essentially taken this disruptive innovation that can actually bring costs down, and said, "Don't come to New Hampshire. We don't want you here." So this is the type of situation where government regulation is actually interfering with our ability to take the steps to actually get people to become more price sensitive and focus on costs. And then the other question is just nowhere near enough interest in value. And the value is the other piece of that piece of legislation that creates these monopoly zones. Monopoly zones are brutal when it comes to quality, because if I can't get another facility within 15 miles, that means I'm basically forced to go to this one provider who has no incentive whatsoever to improve their quality, because they have essentially a monopoly over your healthcare system, at least if you want to stay local. And a lot of people do because of family and things like that. So we need to start focusing on the actual cost and quality of healthcare. Find out how we can get customers who are consumers are naturally price sensitive if they understand the cost and they see a direct relation to their wallets, and they're very much interested in quality. And we've taken and created a wall of opacity in front of both of those that ultimately drives up costs and reduce quality.
Yeah, or anything else that government gets involved in, it works exactly like that. So, in up till about the 30s or 40s, it worked pretty much as you described. People used their own money, their own savings to cover emergencies or small emergencies, and they had insurance to cover large emergencies, or what we call now catastrophic healthcare insurance, which is what you have, I presume, as your backup. Mm-hmm. And also if you were rich enough, you just self-insured and said, you know what, if something really bad happens, I can afford it. Mm-hmm. And maybe you post a bond if they insist, but, I mean, back then you didn't even do that.
Right. It was the price controls in World War II that were put in place. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt put wage controls.
Yeah.
Put wage controls in, which actually limited wages. So of course so as a result of that bad policy, one of the ways that employers were able to add an additional benefit to try to bring people into healthcare, and to come work for them to create a benefit, it was Kaiser Permanente, which is a shipbuilding company, or Kaiser Shipbuilding. It was a shipbuilding company that offered health insurance in California, and that was the reason they were trying to attract workers to come work for them. And they said, "Listen, we can't pay you any more than this because of the wage controls, so we'll give you this benefit here." Yeah. And ultimately, Kaiser does not make ships anymore. But Kaiser Permanente is one of the larger health insurance companies in the country.
And especially in California. They practically own California. They're not a bad company either.
No. But it's interesting how one bad government policy set forth a chain of events which has led to a huge number of problems in the entire healthcare system.
Yeah, and let us not forget that bad policies work the same everywhere they're tried. The Cubans are piss poor and starving, if you'll pardon the expression, because of communist policies. The Venezuelans are the same way because of communist policies. In Britain, the government short-circuited the bit about private healthcare by writing this 47-page bill, yes, 47, not 2,000, that created the National Health Service. And the Brits are kind of proud of it because it sort of works, but it is socialist medicine, and you have to opt out if you want better quality service. But
by the way, a lot of British doctors come to America to practice medicine
because they can get paid a going rate for their services instead of a dumbed-down rate that they can barely afford to work for, or can't pay off their student loans or the equivalent, because even in Britain it's not totally free to get to become a doctor. Anyway, in Britain, we also had wage and price controls in the 60s and early 70s under socialist governments because, guess what? Bad policies, heavy union activity, poor energy policies, the whole works caused stagflation, just like we got here in the 70s. And so what happens then? Well, people are demanding that wages go up. And when the wages go up, the costs go back around, and of course you've got runaway inflation. They never want to blame the source, which is money printing, which is why the pound dropped in value from $4 to the pound to less than
$1.50.
Well, it's $1.30 now, but during the time of those deflations, when before we had totally floating currencies like we have today, where everybody prints money all the time, it dropped from 4 to 2.8 to 2.4 and kept going down. because the government was printing the money, basically, to keep us afloat. So, of course, we had inflation. And they imposed wage and price controls, which just makes everybody miserable. And guess what? And this happened across Europe at different times. The institution in Europe in business for the relatively junior employees is the company car. In some cases, quite decent company cars. The number of folks scooting around Europe in BMWs and Mercedes that you think, how's he afford that? Well, it's easy. It's his company perk. It's part of his wages, because that way it doesn't increase his taxes, or not as much. Well, this went on for about 20 years in Britain before the government realized they were not getting the tax money on this salary increase that they had forbidden. So people were getting it in cars instead. Just like here, we get it in medical benefits instead. And the government was not getting the tax money on this. They started to tax it. Well, you can see the same thing here. The unions are squawking because Obamacare taxes their Cadillac plans, i.e., if you give much better than average medical coverage to your employees, you're considered to be giving them a salary increase, and therefore we're going to tax you. Because you, and
it's true on the other side. If you don't meet the qualifications, you have to pay the tax. If your health care is too bad, I use pejorative. I mean, the health care is probably just fine, but it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that Obamacare demands. You have to pay a tax. If it's got too many bells and whistles, you have to pay a tax. It's kind of like the with Goldilocks phenomenon.
Yeah, so you have to be in
the healthcare equivalent of a mouse suit.
You have to be.
You will wear this.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be in the center of the bathtub curve, which is more like a bloodbath tub curve, because basically people are dying as a result of bad service.
60% increases. There are a whole host of plans that are up 20+% for next year. And to what Steve was saying, that's going to come right out of wages. These cost increases for these insurance companies, they're not going to be borne by the employers. The employers are going to pass those costs.
You're going to lose benefits. You're going to lose access.
Higher deductibles.
You're going to lose wages.
There's only one thing that they don't tax the employer on too badly right now. So, Steve, you're at a small company that's stable and might suddenly become more valuable. Make sure you've got stock options in the company.
Oh, we're not public yet.
No, you don't have to be public.
Oh, that's true.
Before you go public.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Oh, yes. No, we talk about that because we have a woman who works for us who worked for a different company that had options in the company. When the company went public, she made tons of money.
Yeah.
And she eventually left them and came to work for us, and she's retiring in a couple of years. She's kind of hoping, that we do the same thing before she retires. It'd be nice. It's a niche. Yeah. It's a niche industry, if you'd like to say niche.
Yeah.
But a lot in the world of Amazons and eBays and all these places that you have all these distribution facilities. It's like Amazon, of course, is the biggest one. They all use forklifts. They all use all kinds of lift trucks. They all use all kinds of technology and sorting devices. And we build technology that you can stick in a warehouse. It won't break down. You can run it 24/7, 365. Sometimes for 5 years straight without an issue. So they need that stuff, and we design and deploy it. So it's a great place to be. It's just the economy has sucked since Obama became president.
Right, but the point is, you're in a good company that you personally have put a lot of sweat equity into. I've heard the stories of how much you work.
God, they don't even know what my job description is. I do everything basically. I've changed I'm a support specialist basically. That's my new title because I support every single department in one way or another. I sit in shipping and receiving because I run that.
Right.
But I'm engineering support because I do documentation control. I handle photographs of everything. I do all our documents. I issue all our part numbers. And that's just one part of my job. And then there's marketing stuff, and then there's sales stuff, and then there's
just the type of skilled worker
materials
who
management
should be in demand in this economy.
If you were in Silicon Valley or Austin, Texas, there would be high-tech startups ripping your arm off and offering you salary and bonuses and benefits and stock options.
And that's one of the things that we're seeing in New Hampshire is we just aren't competitive enough. We're just not competitive enough. And we talk about this all the time. Why on earth does it make sense to open a shop in Massachusetts? And why is it that we see 100,000 people have to go to Massachusetts every day? And the reason why is because we're just not competitive enough to continue to grow our economy here. And why is that? We still have, even with the tax cuts we got in the last 2 years for tax relief for employers. I'll tell you, we still have the highest business taxes in the region. We have the 5th highest electric costs in the country, 3rd highest in the continental U.S. We have, depending on the survey you look at, the Kaiser Foundation says that we are, Kaiser again, it said we have the 9th highest healthcare costs. So that adds up to a toxic mix that makes New Hampshire not competitive enough. And that's a lot of the things that we focus on at AFP.
Corporate offices in Connecticut.
Exactly. And so if it makes sense to be in Connecticut.
How do you figure that high-cost blue state Connecticut is a better place to have your corporate
Well,
office?
that's where the president lives.
Okay, well,
That's kind of why.
well, no, but there has to be a fiscal reason for it, too.
I'm sure he has one.
That reduces taxes and not just his personal ones. And you have to ask yourself, why are there businesses in Massachusetts that aren't here? Why is it that the place that has no income tax doesn't attract any businesses?
Well, great point.
Because they make
There's lots of reasons, and you made the point at
Absolutely.
the summit. Right to work.
Right to work.
Right to work. Manufacturing would come to New Hampshire if we had right to work.
And that's important, but it's not the only thing. You have to get, if you want to attract manufacturing, you have to pass right to work. That's a critical component. There's a number of businesses who would love to have a presence in the Northeast, and right to work would give the first state in the Northeast, give those protections to employers. And that's important as next week is National Employee Freedom Week. Important to remind people about that. But you also have to get your electricity costs down, because manufacturing is an intensive user of electricity, and you have to start taking the steps to get there. A lot of those things are it takes a while to implement fully, but some of the things we can do over the short term. Let's start rebating 100% of the RGGI and RPS funds back to the ratepayers. Or even just get rid of the programs outright. That just drives up the cost of electricity.
And every time
and
they
wouldn't freight rail make a fortune if we had an auto plant in New Hampshire?
Exactly. Now maybe I should look at it that way. If we put some major plants in New Hampshire, they'd have to upgrade the rail system so that maybe the passenger rail wouldn't cost as much.
Because people from Massachusetts would need to get to their good-paying jobs in Manchester.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's what I said earlier. The only reason I want to see rail is one train a day runs into New Hampshire to drop off the workers, and one train a night runs out of New Hampshire to take them back to Massachusetts. That's the reason to justify rail, to bring them here. Let us import the worker.
Well, you know, companies for a while in the 90s, and I don't know if they still do this, like UPS and FedEx, who have freight trains, aircraft, the one that flies over your house every morning at 5:30. Mm-hmm. Well, those things come and they drop stuff off, but sometimes they move empty. Well, they created a system where they could put seats in these things and use them as commercial airlines so that they could fill those seats, fly it back where the plane was going, and make money using freight people in actual airplanes, we're flying in commercial, and then they drop them off, and then they take the seats out, they'd fill it up with cargo, and send it somewhere else.
Just make sure you pressurize the cabin.
Of course. Absolutely. But, they would have to meet FAA guidelines, right? It was required. And I don't know how long they did it for, if they still do it. But
it's funny. You
could do it with freight trains.
Businesses naturally look for opportunities to innovate. They naturally look for these chances. You don't need to tell them. You don't need a government program to tell them to look for these opportunities.
They will find ways to save money. They will do environmentally sound things if it makes them or saves them money.
Absolutely.
And this is always the case, which is why a prosperous society tends to be a cleaner society. Not just because you've got idle do-gooders who've got time on their hands in a prosperous society, but because it turns out to be the efficient thing to do. And
because pollution is typically waste, right? Yeah, pollution is typically waste, and
waste heat, waste light, waste chemicals.
Absolutely. So to the extent that you can reduce waste, it actually reduces pollution and makes a better society and makes economic sense.
And you can put that little green leaf thing on your website. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
We actually have companies that compete for our mechanical waste, our scrap boards and stuff that they come and pick up for free. And then they recycle them because they make a profit somewhere on the other end, reusing or repurposing these metals and these parts. So, and it saves us money having to worry about disposal costs. So there's always people looking for an opportunity in a free market and an open economy to do those sort of things. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about the legislative scorecard, AFP's legislative scorecard, and then I think Mr. J.R. Hole will be joining us to talk about God knows what, but we'll find out when we get there. Stay tuned.
Raw Talk.